is actually cool. Thank you. All right, awesome. So I think we're ready to go here. We might have one more person joining us in a minute, if I'm counting right. Maybe I'm not. Either way, I hope everyone had a good week. Hope everyone's staying healthy, all that sort of stuff. I was really excited to see everyone using the Slack channel. That's obviously what we say you should do, but it doesn't mean everyone does it. So thank you for sharing work in there. And we're going to do a little bit of a session in the next couple of minutes just to like have people talk about what they were making and stuff more as we go forward. So just to remind everybody, here's where we are right now. So last week we just talked about some basic stuff. This week we're actually going to look at some inspiration. I realize that's backwards. So we're gonna look at a couple like inspiration pieces. There's some projects that I've seen from people using Runway that I think are worth showing to you all. We're gonna do a little bit of model exploration, and then we're also going to, we're gonna do some model exploration. We're gonna look at just sort of 2 models that I think are important to learn. I know at least a couple people asked me about vector inputs. So we're gonna talk about that today as well. So we will definitely be covering some things. So here's what we're gonna look at for today. So we're going to look at some homework. We're just going to discuss it in small groups. Leah is going to help run that. Then we're going to look at some inspiration projects. I'll talk a little bit about how you might want to approach your project. Again, I would love for everyone to have like a big-ish project, depending on what big means for you by the end of class. So 4 weeks left still, so got time to think about it. So I'll talk a little bit how I might approach it if it were me. We'll take a little break. We're then going to talk again about our project ideas, so we might do a little breakout session for that as well. And then we have 2 demos today, so we're going to look at vector inputs, and Leah is going to talk to us about style transfer. And then we'll talk about our homework, and then we'll always have time for Q&A. So again, I'm happy to, hopefully, I think we can do all this in an hour and a half, but if you want to stick around or have more questions, we can always have more time to talk afterward. Cool, so I think Leah, you're going to run this part.
Yeah. So you guys like did a great job of like exploring Runway. I saw all the chit chat that was happening on Slack. Now you guys are gonna talk to each other in some small groups of 3 or 4 students each. You're gonna be in there for 7 minutes talking to each other about just kind of sharing what models do you use, what inputs and outputs did you identify, what questions or observations you have. Do you have any tips? Do you want to share each other what you made? You can feel free to share your screen. And so after those 7 minutes, then we'll be bringing you guys into a larger group, slightly larger group of 7 to 8 students with either me or Derek there to kind of field any questions you have. Sound good to everyone? Cool.
So I would also say, if I can just add one thing.
Yeah.
When we're in our small groups, like please talk as much as you can. Like I know that maybe not everyone made stuff, but like talk about what you're interested in or working on or other things. But don't waste 2 or 3 minutes like standing around waiting for someone to jump in. Just please jump in and start talking as soon as you can.
Yeah, cool. And so I'm gonna send you all to your breakout rooms right now. And then I'll give you guys like a 1-minute reminder right before you're gonna go into a larger group of 7 to 8 with Derek or I. Cool.
Since I have you. So in RunwayML, we're pretty much limited to basically models that other people have uploaded or ones that we've trained.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. That's definitely one of the limitations of Runway is you don't really have that much capability to do more than that. Although they are trying to add more and more, like I wouldn't say every week, but like usually there are some new models like at least every week or 2. And I'm actually going to probably try, we'll see if I get to it in this class, but I want to actually bring over the style transfer model that I use because I think it's going to be better overall. It's a little finicky moving stuff into Runway because you have to test it on a separate GPU, which is like kind of its own process. But I will try to do that. And then we can talk about, so I have a bunch of videos on training other models if you're interested in doing that. And we can just talk sort of at the end of this course, like how people might be able to like keep learning or like do their own thing after that. Are we all back? Looks like we're all back.
Yeah, looks like we're all back.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're gonna go into lecture portion of class today with some inspiration on Runway and handing it back to Derek now.
Thank you. That was very fun to just be sucked in and out of wherever I was supposed to be. Like, it's like a pretty, like, feels like almost like the only analog we'll ever get to like being able to like move around time or whatever. So I do want to actually, I want to bring up a little bit. So if people haven't gotten a chance to check out the Slack channel yet, I do want to actually like, I want to like sort of show it. And there's some really cool stuff in here that I thought was really amazing from this week. So I want to highlight like, so Nye made this great video, which sort of like shows a couple different examples of different things using motion. So there's a couple models that we probably won't get into into this class, but there's stuff around pose estimation. So being able to track people's poses. And there's open piff path, which gives you sort of a skeleton. Then there's dense pose, which gives you this more, how do I replay this? Which gives you sort of this gradient. And then you can apply it to other models. Or I guess this is, Naya, I think this is you tracking this video, but applying it to other things. Is that right?
Yeah, I was trying to like, because part of my interest is trying to like do motion transfer. And then I see these models where they take a target and then they take the motion. And then so I tried to paint over, like, I just sort of Photoshop hack and slash the Goofy there to try to see if it could like puppet it a little bit, but it kind of just didn't work at all. So
yeah, I wonder how much. So a lot of things to know about with this type of stuff is that scale is really important. So like the models that I've seen, the scale has been like their head is like up here and their feet are here. So I almost wonder if it's like if you cropped in closer into this video, you might get better results. This is one of the funny things about a lot of these models. They're trained for such specific things that it can sometimes you have to play around with things to actually get it to work. So scale is one of the things I definitely recommend messing around with. Mercedes, I think you had also done some stuff around pose. Was that right?
Yes, but I just tested it with pictures, not with
Okay.
any video. The videos I had weren't of good quality, but it worked pretty well.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
the poses were weird and it worked pretty well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so like we don't have all class, unfortunately, to go through all of these, but I definitely recommend just digging through some of these and seeing like what people have made, because I think there's some really interesting stuff. I know some people jumped into training already, some people jumped into chaining stuff together, so I'm pretty excited to see where we end up. We'll be covering some of that stuff in more depth over the next couple weeks, so it might actually like be that you learn more, or you learn maybe why certain things didn't work the way you expected to as we go forward. So definitely take a chance, like, every week to just check out the Slack channel. I personally find that if you don't check Slack every week, or at least like maybe every couple days, it will start to feel overwhelming how much stuff is here, especially with this group. So just maybe like check in every couple days and see what people have made. And there's some really great like sort of comments on what they've learned and whatnot. So really excited to see everyone working on this stuff. So I am gonna start a lecture, and I'm just gonna talk about some inspiration. So again, sort of what I want everyone to do for the end of this class is to maybe have a project. And again, everyone has different lengths of time that they have available to them. So I'm not expecting everyone to like make their own app or like anything like that. But if you do have time and you want to explore some things, I'm happy to talk about how you might go about doing that. So I've got some projects here that range from like maybe like what I think would be like the baseline expectation for people to make in this class, all the way to like things I would not expect anyone to make in this class, but are still cool and maybe you want to think about them. So the first project here is from a ceramicist. I don't actually know her last name, but her blog is called From Fran. And these are all photographs of her pottery. Or actually, this is a StyleGAN model that was trained on all of her pottery. And then you'll see the StyleGAN model spit out these very funky sort of like two-handled cups and other things. So what I really like about this project is like, it's using all of her own materials to train on. And it's almost sort of like a feedback loop for her to start thinking about how she makes stuff. And I linked to her blog post where she sort of walks through what she did, things she learned about it, and then ideas she took from it. So I think what I really like is like, she did this as an exploration, but the idea is not that like this is the end result. It's like now she's gonna actually start making pottery from some of these ideas. So she talked a lot about handles and different sizes of handles. She talked about sort of coloration and other things. So she talked about how this just gave her more ideas. So I think this is a really interesting way. If you are an artist and like you create a lot of work yourself, you might want to just try like experimenting with making new things that might reflect back on your own work in Runway.
Oh, I did have a question about the pottery thing.
Yeah.
So obviously she fed it like a large data set, but since most of it is just like basically like trying to morph between a few things, it looks like, that could you actually feed it less and still have that morphing animation happen?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that next week or the week after when we talk about training. It's kind of a fine line. The less number of images you have, the more likely you are to hit a thing called overfitting, which basically just means it memorizes things. And then you don't get this morph, you get sort of it just like repeats the images back to you. So the size of your data set is pretty important. And we'll talk about that in a couple weeks when I like actually talk about training. But in general, like the bigger your data set is, the better it's going to be in the end. But you also need to think about things like diversity, which we'll also talk about then.
Is the right side the data set?
No, both these are outputs. So the right side is like a grid of images that were output from it. If you go to her link, you can see what she fed it. But it's, I mean, I'll say like, I think that the images are fairly similar. There's just a lot of like interesting sort of morphological changes that have happened. Cool, so this is a project from Janelle Shane. If you're not familiar with her work, I highly recommend checking out. She has like a great sense of humor. She just put out a book that's all about AI that I might recommend people check out if they're really interested in this. She generally does a lot with like words and text training. So when she does stuff with images, she tends to use Runway. So this is a project where she fed, I'm just gonna play it. It's only 42 seconds, but so basically what she did is she fed a scene from Star Wars into a segmentation map and then use the Spade Coco output to regenerate what the images should look like. So it's basically like trying to learn what the segments are, and then it's gonna like output them based on those segment labels. So it produces this very, very weird, like totally messy looking thing, but it's kind of fun. And like so a lot of Janelle's work is about how AI is stupid or like does weird things. So this is like a perfect example of like that sort of happening here. You'll also notice the frame rate is very slow, and this is a kind of a problem with Runway or like machine learning in general. Is like I think she fed it a video live and it only spit out every like 10 frames or whatever. So you might be able to do this if you broke this up into individual frames. You might actually be able to get more frames out of it, but I bet it still wouldn't feel as seamless as the video. So this is like just a really like simple like two-chained model. But it produces some pretty weird results. So this is a project by an artist by the name of Fabin Rashid. So this looks pretty crazy, and to be honest, it kind of is. But essentially, he made a p5.js web app that talks to Runway. So he basically has built like a drawing tool that he can use on his iPad. And as he draws, it talks to Runway using, I think, Spade Coco or something similar. So he basically has this live drawing tool where he can now draw giraffes and re-edit scenes and that sort of thing. So I would definitely say this is like the high end of what I would expect anyone to work on, because building a P5.js app is like not easy. But I think it's really, really interesting how, he was able to take something as simple as just the Runway app and able to like really make it his own by basically create an app for himself. So definitely high level of advanced capabilities, but still pretty fun.
So I'm assuming that involves like major coding, right?
You definitely have to know JavaScript to be able to do that, yes. But if you know JavaScript and you understand how Spade Coco works, it's actually not that hard. I mean, obviously I'm saying it's not that hard, but like you have to know all this stuff. But I would actually say there's no machine learning involved in it. All you're doing is passing a bunch of values or passing an image to Runway and then getting the image back from Runway. So it's actually like fairly simple in terms of like the actual machine learning side of it. It's just building this interface to make a drawing tool is definitely complicated.
When you say Runway, is that a web API or is that like
yeah, so there's no web API. It's just an API that you have over localhost.
Okay.
So this is probably running just like locally on a local web server or something. And it can, if you Runway open, and you're running a model, you can speak to it over localhost.
Yeah, like Dan Schiffman has some good examples of P5.js into Runway, but yeah, I'm assuming the same thing. This isn't on the web yet.
Yes, I mean if it's a JavaScript file, it can be on the web or it can be here. But yes, I would assume this is just running locally over a network or something. So this is a piece by Adam Picard, who's actually in my StyleGAN class right now. This is a runway model that he trained, a StyleGAN model that he trained on stained glass. He then did an interpolation of that stained glass, brought that into Cinema 4D, and then he used some lighting renderers to light through it. So if you know Cinema 4D, like this, I personally don't, so I can't say how hard this is, but I think it's fairly doable. So again, this is just a case of where he's using StyleGAN, but then making it available like to his own other methodology. So if you're a 3D artist, there's some interesting things you could potentially do with this stuff, which I think is pretty cool.
It is worth noting that he used a third-party renderer to get the realistic light. I mean, they still have a decent renderer, but
yes,
that thing's also not free.
Yes, yeah, and Adam is a 3D artist, so like he definitely knows what he's doing. But I think part of this is like, again, if you're an artist using it, working in a certain medium, like you shouldn't feel like you're stuck inside Runway. You should always be able to feel like you can take stuff out of it. But yes, this is definitely like, again, because of his expertise, he's able to do this. I would not expect anyone to just like randomly be able to open Cinema 4D, buy Arnold renderer, and be able to do this. Not the easiest thing. I think it's the last project, maybe not. This is by Andreas Refsgaard. This is again just a StyleGAN model, and he trained it on like vintage tintype photos, and then he ran it through Deoldify, and Deoldify is a model that takes black and white photography and adds color to it. So it's sort of like it's been trained on color photographs and black and whites, and it knows how to convert between the two. This is again a really cool. This is, I would think would totally be within reason for this class. It's a StyleGAN training, and then it's basically generating color images using this. And he's probably using P5JS to generate the latent space animation, which we will talk about probably 2 weeks from now, or maybe at the last week where we talk about how to integrate with P5JS.
Is it just me, or all the faces look exactly the same?
So this is a case of where he probably had a small amount of data, and therefore it's what I would call overfitting, but it's not overfitting in like a terrible way, because you still get a little bit of these interpolations, but you will notice that it sort of jumps a little bit. It's not like this completely smooth version. There's still like these scenes that sort of jump between things. And that is probably overfitting. And we'll talk about that more in a couple weeks, but like, yes, that's a case of where I think he had a small data set and it didn't work as well as it could, but it's still a cool output.
And just to jump in on that, so this is video, and because I'm trying to think about that, like eventually you can spit out consistent frames
with
like
StyleGAN. With StyleGAN or with BigGAN, so basically we'll talk after the break, we'll talk about vector inputs. Anything that has a vector input, using something like P5JS, you can spit out a consistent, like seamless interpolated video. That is not true for every model inside a Runway, but that is true for models that use vector inputs. And we'll talk about why that is in like 20 minutes. Cool. Okay, so we got like 5 minutes before break. I want to quickly talk about, so I've shown a couple pieces of projects. These were all taken from, by the way, these were all taken from Runway's like social media. So either from their Twitter account or Instagram account, or they have some bigger, like quite complex projects that are using Runway. They have a page called Made with Runway that I'll add to our class notes. So if you want to check out more projects, they definitely have more available to you up there. This is just a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. So as you probably saw, like things that I'm interested in are like, you do not have to be a machine learning expert to like get interesting outputs from these things. So in the case of Adam's stained glass, I think that was like the first model he'd ever generated. I certainly know with Fran, the ceramicist, like that was the first model she'd ever done. But what I think is like, what's interesting there is they're using things they're already interested in or things they already know about. So in these cases, some questions you might think about are like, what's unique to your art, or what are unique to your interests? Like you don't have to be an artist to be doing this stuff. So let's say you're really into like skateboards, you're really into like, I don't know, snowboards, and you know like a site that has hundreds of images of skateboards or snowboards, and you want to try making your own deck or like that sort of thing. Like that's certainly a technique you could do here. But I would say like, don't try to force it, because if you try to like force to find something you're not really interested in, you're going to be bored and you're not going to want to do it. So like find something you're interested in, or like something you might have an idea about. it's certainly true that if you want to do some StyleGAN training, you need a lot of something. So you need a lot of images. In general, my floor for images inside of StyleGAN is about 500. Anything less than that, and you might run into issues, and I don't really want people to waste their money like doing training. So, you know, if you have an idea for something, you're like, I have 250 of these images, we can talk about ways you might be able to find more or get more, or like just expand it a little bit more. I will say if you have 250, it might work out. It just sort of depends. But in general, like I try to put it around 500 to 1,000, which can be hard. And so next week, we're going to talk about how you might grab some of those images. And then lastly, like, as you've seen here, we've got some people who are interested in 3D. We've got some people who are interested in animation. We've got some people who are pottery experts, like those sort of things. So again, I would say like a cool thing to do is just use Runway as a way to create some inspirational ideas. I've seen people who have trained StyleGAN models in Runway on fonts and then like taken the font that was generated and like made an actual real font out of it. So there's lots of cool stuff, and it should really be about like, what are you interested in and what do you want to do with this to sort of, again, make new materials for yourself. I really like the idea of making materials out of these things. So before we go to break, are there any questions? I will take silence as a no. So let's take 5 minutes. And so let's meet back here at 20 after. Cool? You want the high-res image, and like, you can't really do that using this, which is a little annoying, but it might be a good place to start and just sort of see how it goes. This is a case of where I would probably use something like Beautiful Soup to do like a bigger scrape of actual, like almost a whole site to try to get high-res images, but this is a good place to start, and some places it will work fine.
Yeah, I've used that one before, and then the one that I was trying out was called Image Parser.
Okay.
So I haven't stress tested it, but
cool. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just posting that in the Slack, that'd be great.
I had a question. If you have links to where the images are hosted, like let's say, you know, some AWS server or wherever their servers are, like having that list and then just downloading that, what would be the best, or do you suggest?
Tab save is a really good extension for that. I use that.
What's it called?
Tab save.
Yeah, I would say like if people have ideas, like just post them in Slack. I would personally script it, but like obviously not everyone has capabilities to script stuff. So Leah, how would you feel about moving this to the end of class?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, awesome. So I think like maybe after you learn a little bit more about a couple of the models, you might have more ideas about how to like do certain projects. So we'll have a small group discussion at the end of class just to sort of talk about projects. And that way we'll see where we land in terms of time. Anyone have any additional thoughts or questions during break? All right, silence is a no. Okay, so we're gonna do 2 demos today. We're gonna do a demo of how vector inputs work. I know that was a common question in the Slack channel this week. And then Leah is going to show how style transfer works. So we'll get started with vector inputs. Okay, so you might have heard of this thing called a latent space. And latent spaces and vector inputs are sort of similar to each other in the sense that they're basically a different representation of the same thing. So let's imagine that we have a plot of dots, and each of these dots is a photo or an image. Now, in reality, latent space, like every little square inch of this plot is an image. But in this case, let's just use this as an example. So let's say at this dot here is an image of this person. And then let's say at this dot here, we have this person. So you'll see these are 2 very different people. But if we actually like find a dot that say is closer to this image, so let's maybe pick this dot, you'll see that these 2 images are pretty similar to each other, right? Shorter hair, maybe more masculine features, slightly different skin tone. So this is the idea of how latent space works, right? So points in space that are closer to each other are going to be more closely related in terms of images. Whereas points in space that are further apart are going to be different more different types of images. So the question is, what happens if we draw a line from here to here? So basically going from this photo to this photo. And let's say we actually want to animate this line. So like as we move along it, we're going to basically like at each one of these points, we're going to take a different person or take the image drawn at that point, right? And this might be obvious, but basically what you get is this. So as you move from this point to this point, you basically are generating an animation, right? And the reason that works is because all of these points, because they're very close to each other, you essentially are building an animation. All the features, which are what you're sort of seeing change here, right? The features of their face, whether it's wearing a hat or the hair or facial, like facial hair, like that sort of thing. As you move along this line, it's slowly changing. And now this is the concept between the animations that you've seen people producing using StyleGAN. Now, this is a very simple explanation of how this works because I'm showing it to you in two-dimensional space. But the truth is that the space is actually multi-dimensional. So StyleGAN in particular uses what we call 512 dimensions, which literally just means 3D, but like way more. Like our brains just cannot handle, like we can maybe handle 4D if you add time, but like we can't literally handle 512 dimensions. Like it's just not possible for us to visualize that. So the way people do it is they visualize three-dimensional space and they say like, there's 3, but there's more. So you might also be wondering like, what are these dimensions? And these dimensions are what we call features. And features are a little tricky. Like the most rational human way to explain it is like, maybe those features are hair color or length of hair or facial hair or not facial hair. The truth is a machine like thinks about them drastically differently. But as they become represented is what we say as humans as like facial hair, skin color, like those sort of things. So 512 dimensions. So like that's sort of the idea here. Now, Runway in the vector input, which is that grid, which we'll look at in just a minute when we demo one of these models, it is reducing this 512 dimensional space to 2 dimensions, which I think some people were talking about t-SNE in the Slack channel before. t-SNE is a way of converting high dimensional space into 2 dimensions. There's a couple other different ways. And Runway uses their own version that I don't really know if I've even seen how they describe it. It's basically a genetic algorithm plus some mapping, I believe. But essentially what they're doing is they're compressing this latent space into a 2D grid for you to help you explore the different features in that. So we'll talk about this more when we talk about interpolation in probably week 4 and week 5. But essentially what's happening when you see these like very crazy sort of interpolated animations is we're essentially doing something like this. We're just sort of like, again, remember you're in 512 dimensional space. So it's like more than 3, but you're basically starting somewhere and then you just sort of like create a crazy line through these spaces. And if you end up back where you started, it's a loop, right? So like if you start at frame 0 and then you animate all the way through it and then come back to it, it creates a perfect loop because this circle here is always the same image, right? So with a model, the points in space are always, if you always go to the exact same point, say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 for 512 dimensions, it will always be the same image. Now, if you train it a little bit longer and you get a different model, that image might change. But based on the model that we train on, the points in space will always be the same. So that means that you could always go back to that point and find that image again. So you could just say, animate from this point, then draw a new shape and animate from another point. So this is sort of like how we get some of these crazy animations in latent space. So I'm going to demo how this works in sort of vector inputs by jumping to Runway really quickly.
Can I ask a question about features, Derek?
You can, yep.
So you said that the model kind of determines what the features are?
Yep.
So in your example, there was this distance, but like if you had 2 women and it was based on the women, like they would be closer than versus male, and like, so like where do these features come? Is it entirely based on the pixels and the colors? And you said things like facial hair and whatever, but like what about sort of training parameters and stuff? Does that come from the user input, or does that come from like how does that sort of work?
So a lot of this is just built into StyleGAN by default. So when you run Runway's training, and we'll talk about this more when we get into training, not next week or the week after, Runway just has default parameters for the StyleGAN model. And that's sort of been built up over a couple, like basically the people who made StyleGAN decided what those parameters should be or what the default parameters should be. And they're generally made for that facial structure, that face model. So you can't really, so in my StyleGAN class, which is like my more advanced version of this class, we do go into all those parameters, but I would also say like those parameters don't change that much. These models use what's called convolution filters, which if you know anything about computer vision or like edge detection, they're basically using that same idea and just sort of almost reverse engineering it, which is like they're making the features out of the data set you give it. So if I were to give this data set a picture of cars, it wouldn't try to look for the facial hair of cars, right? Like we're not embedding the feature maps in this. This is where it's machine learning or AI is like it learns the features itself. And it learns it using convolutions, but like it's still, it is finding the features itself. So we also don't necessarily have, like we can't force it to say like, you must find this feature. The way we could do that is maybe by changing the data set to emphasize a certain type of feature. So if I were, let's say the example you have of women, if I only really wanted to find facial hair, I wouldn't use any women in my data set, or like maybe I would, a couple women. But you know, like I would over aggressively change my data set to be about like masculine facial hair, and maybe it's type of facial hair, like that sort of thing. So that's like the challenge of machine learning is that like, you don't really tell it what to find. It finds whatever it wants to find using the architecture that's already been given to it. So for this demo, I'm just going to grab a random StyleGAN model, unless someone has one they really, really like. Should we do Simpsons? I heard someone talking about.
I really like the Magic the Gathering one.
The Magic the Gathering one?
Mm-hmm.
Did I pass it already?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Oh, yeah, it is. It's right on the right.
This one? Cool. Okay, so let's use this. Okay, so this was someone trained this on Magic the Gathering card art. They trained it inside Runway, and once you finish training something in Runway, you can choose to make your model public or keep it private for yourself. So I have some private models in here. I don't care if you see them, they're nothing special. But I could also make those public and let anyone from the community use them. So someone has trained this, and it's an opportunity for me to use it. Because I know how StyleGAN works, I'm just gonna go and like directly add this to my workspace from here. So I'm gonna click this. It looks like it's added it to an old one. So I'm just gonna clean this up a little bit. So you can delete models by just coming in here and deleting stuff. Okay, so I know that everyone sort of was like, what is vector input? So that is how inputs for StyleGAN models work. So remember, in something like Big ByGAN or in something like a style transfer, the input is a image. But for these models, the input is a vector. And it's that latent space vector that we talked about. So I'm going to start running this, and we can look at it, how it works. So these models do take a little bit of time. And again, it's worth remembering, when I've started this, it's starting to charge me by the minute. So I'm being charged 5 cents a minute now. This is now running. You'll see it says stop. What it's doing is it's pre-generating a bunch of images within this field. So this is Magic the Gathering art. So you'll see it starts with like a pretty high range of grid images. Now, basically the way to work with this is if you click and drag, you can explore different parts of the space. Now, I think what's important to note is like, I showed a demo of it in 2-dimensional space, and you're thinking, well, like, this is clearly top and to the left, and this is clearly bottom and to the right of that 2 dimension. That's not how it works. This is just sort of a sampling of this 512-dimensional space. But what it does show you is it shows you like, okay, I've got some things within a certain area of color. I would say the shapes on these are like not my favorite shapes. Like they all sort of look a little bit just messy overall. But maybe if I'm really interested in colors or a particular type of shape, I can sort of like see what's available. And when you click on one of these, it's going to enlarge it and make it here. Go for it.
Hey, sorry, I wanted to ask why, is there a specific reason it's 512?
It's just the way the architecture was built.
Okay.
I've actually seen some people who have made it larger, custom, but I don't know if it really does that much more for you. It probably just takes longer to train. 512 seems to be about the right amount for, especially for faces. And the more features you have, like the longer it takes to train and like the more messy it might get. So 512 seems to be about a good amount for most folks. So again,
and it's a good amount for a sort of a wide range of things, like including faces as well as Magic the Gathering cards.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So,
okay.
Question about training this: that would it have been better if he had just curated like figures and cropped them all into like the same spot?
Yes. Yep. Okay. I'm sure that the reason this is messy is because
just randomly
there's all different types of art for Magic the Gathering, right? It's like got people in different poses, like that sort of thing. This gets to the thing we'll talk about next week, which is diversity, and this is probably too diverse and why it sort of became a mess. Another reason is this might have been trained on StyleGAN 1. This is getting too far out of the world, but like StyleGAN 1 didn't work as well for non-face data. Runway now uses StyleGAN 2, which is much better for other things. You don't need to worry about that, but that just might end up be another reason why this one didn't produce like that interesting of spaces. Now, okay, we've seen like a very wide, diverse sample of images here. If I want to find something that is more like, okay, I really like this image, but I want to see what other options are available to me, there's a thing over here called sampling distance. And if I turn this down, sampling distance essentially says like, how wide of a dispersion should I grab from? So I've taken this image and I want to change the sampling distance to something smaller. So I'm going to crank this down to like, let's say 0.2. And now what you'll see is you're basically getting things close to this image in space, right? So we're seeing some images here that are just different colors, but maybe the same shapes, slightly different shapes, slightly different things. So we're seeing different stuff. I'm also noticing, now that I mentioned this was only trained on 1,500 steps, which is like probably way too low. So this is probably another reason why the images aren't great. I would train this for 5,000 steps and you might get better results. So other things to note when you play with other people's models is like, again, we'll talk about this in week 4, but like that's another thing to note. So, okay, so we're seeing, you also notice this is not the fastest loading thing, in part because I think this genetic algorithm they have is like trying to generate, it's probably generating more images than it needs to display here. So it's a little slow. The nice thing is you can also like just click to zoom in a little bit if you want to see more details. Okay, so that covers sampling distance. So let's talk about this other thing over here called truncation. Truncation is a very complex topic, but essentially what it means is how close to the realistic data set is it? So if a truncation value is 0.5 or smaller, that usually means I want something really realistic compared to the data set. If you have something higher, 0.8 is pretty high, that means it can be very different from the data set. Now there's some crazy math that goes on behind that, but this is basically the way I would think about it. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna turn this down to, let's say 0.5. And then I'm gonna crank up the sampling distance again, just so I get another wide array of images. So you can actually like just click in and add this, punch in a number. Let's set this to 0.7 for sampling distance.
Derek, another question. Can you download a Runway model and continue to train it? Like, can I continue to train this model?
Yeah, so good question. You cannot continue to train other people's models. You can continue to train your own model. And there's no way to download other people's models. That's sort of like the one restriction they have where like you can play with it in Runway, but you can't download someone else's.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. So this is, again, not the fastest thing, but you'll see like, so I cranked the truncation down a little bit more. And I would say these images look a little bit less messy. Like if I squinted, I could almost maybe make out like a fighter or something that like looks more people-like. Again, I think they probably didn't train this long enough, but you can see that like this truncation is maybe something, you see a little bit more sky in the background, right? Like the people are still kind of muddy, but like you can see a little bit more background that looks more realistic. So that's truncation. I recommend like just spending 10 minutes with a StyleGAN model and just playing with it. I might find one that's trained for like 5,000 steps because you might get something better out of that. But you can just play with this. It is a little bit slow just because of Runway. But if you play with things, I think you'll find how these work. And just like slide them really far down to one side, slide them really far out to another side, and just sort of see what happens. Okay, there's a couple other features here I want to talk about. So let's say I really like this image, right? And let's say I want to just save this image. So if I come over here and I hit export and I hit image directory, And then I just like, let's just name an image directory here. So we're going to call this magic gathering StyleGAN. Save that. So now anytime I click around here, I can generate different images. So that's the nice thing about an image directory is when I start to click export, it says stop export. So until I hit stop export, it's not going to stop outputting images. So now I can just click around in here, and every time I click, it's going to save one of these images to my directory. So this is a nice way just to generate a bunch of images. Like you can just generate a ton of images. You could change your slider values here, which I don't know what I really want to do because it's going to reload. It's fine, whatever. So this is how you use an image directory. Now it's important to note that because this is a grid, you can't really do animations, right? Like in animation, you want to manage like way more of the interpolated space. So it's a little bit harder. You can't really do, this is why people use P5.js to actually do interpolations through this. So I'm going to hit stop. And this, if I come here, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, can I have a question?
Go for it, yep.
Yeah, so the if you can't download the vector that created this, right? Because then you could just sort of do the interpolation yourself, right? So if I had like a beginning and an end, right? But you don't have the actual numbers, yeah?
So great question. You can get the vector. The problem is you can't access the model outside of Runway.
Right,
So the way to get the vector here is if you click on an image, and then you come over here and you hit save vector. When you hit save vector, you're going to see this thing pop up really quickly and you have to click on it. It saves it to your desktop or somewhere else. You'll see now that this is a JSON array. If you open this and if you know what a JSON array is, like you won't be shocked to find out what's in here, is a file that looks like this. So what is this? This is an array of 512 numbers. So this is the exact location inside of your latent space of where this image is. So you can also load a vector. So come back to Runway. You can load this vector. So let's say I mess with this. Say I go over here and I like want to run around. Let's just say I want this. So let's say I want this image, and then I want to go back to that image I had already saved. I can load the vector by coming over here and clicking on this and clicking on this vector JSON. So when I open this, it's going to go back to that old image. Now there's one trick here, which is that truncation will change the value of this image slightly. The problem is that the truncation value is not saved with that JSON file. So you kind of have to memorize or like add some notes to your file about what the truncation value is. So I think it was like 0.7 or something. So it's important to know like what you're actually saving is just the vector. And truncation is something that happens on top of that. There is also a way to regenerate the grid. You click this button. It's going to pick, I believe, just a random, yeah, just pick a random spot and then reset with these same values. So this is how vector input works. Vector input is, I believe, something that works for BigGAN. So BigGAN has a similar vector. The difference with BigGAN is it also has categories. So if you were to open this, and maybe I'll do a video demo of this, like, and just record it and save it into our Slack. They have categories. So you could look at like, I think it's like different types of dogs or different types of birds. Like, so there's a vector space and a class label. So it's important to know that like there are different features between different models, but StyleGAN and also BigGAN might not have a truncation value. I don't remember if it does or not. But anyway, StyleGAN, excuse me, always has truncation and always has sampling distance. So this is how most StyleGAN models work. And this is how your StyleGAN model will work as well when you've trained your own. Now you're probably wondering like, cool, you just showed me how to do a really cool interpolation. It doesn't look like I can do that inside of Runway. And the truth is you cannot. The way to do this is through connecting it through P5.js using the network. So again, we talked about like using a localhost network and an HTTP server. I will be showing that in week 5, how to actually make an interpolation video. Runway, when you train your video, does make an interpolation as well for you. So you do have access to a like quickly created interpolation video, but if you want to customize it from there, you'll need to do something else. So I'll show, I have a little sample P5.js file that we can use to interpolate, and I'll tell you, even if you don't know how to code, I'll tell you how to tweak some numbers to get what you want out of it.
Wait, sorry, Derek. When you say interpolate, you mean moving from one vector point or one position in the model to another.
Yeah, and
But
creating
then,
that really
so
fluid animation. Yeah. Yep.
okay, and then how do you then control like the way in which it moves that? Because when we looked at the sort of 3D image you had before, you had this like weird curve. Like,
yes.
do you
In part,
pinpoint a series of points?
yeah. So in the way we do it in P5.js is we're just going to create a loop. We're going to basically make a circle that is in 512 dimensions, and then we're going to throw some noise or randomness onto it, so it like kind of creates this like weird jaggedy path. I would say if you want to do stuff like between points, you could do that. And I could actually pretty quickly write up a P5.js script to do that. But essentially, you'll probably need to do a little bit more manual work. Like you'll actually want to like come in here, pick out some points, save those vectors down, bring those vectors into P5.js and like animate between those. But it's pretty straightforward. Shouldn't be too hard. But yeah, control is like a little bit hard with these models. Again, because you're in 512 dimensional space, you have no idea what those dimensions do or don't do. And you could spend a month exploring each one of those vectors and it might not make any sense to you, which is kind of frustrating, but that's how some of these models work. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop my model. Again, another just thing I wanna point out, again, just to reiterate, is that it'll tell you when you're running your model. So it says you have one model left, it'll tell you how much money you have left, and then you just come here and click stop while running models just to be safe. So you can hit stop, that's gonna stop everything. And if you actually come back to your workspace, you'll see that this model has now been turned off. It's important to note that if you didn't save this last image, if your model is off, you can't save it. So it's still viewed sort of in like a cache or preview here, but you can't actually really save it from there.
As far as the point
go ahead.
That you have there, is that something that you can change? Because before when you had the model running that was faded, both the step button and that certain point.
Yeah, so there are certain options within when you're in the inference tab. There's certain options that can only work before you run a model, and then there are other options that you can change when you're running a model. So in this case, this checkpoint is actually a specific model. So let's say there were a step 4500. Those two models are different models. So when you're running one of them, you can't just switch to the other without restarting your machine. So it's pretty rare that there's actually like different options, but you might, just depending on what model you're in, you might need to play around with it just to sort of find out what options are available before you start a model and what options are available after you start a model. Good question though.
So quick question, that says step 1500. So when you open up someone else's model, you see that number, you know that's basically the max, like that's where it stopped, right? That 1500 steps.
Yeah, so let me find another one in here. Let me see.
I guess I'm also wondering if you, as someone who didn't make that model, if you can, let's say you want to back it up and see what it looked like at step 500, you know, and use that checkpoint. Is that not an option?
No, that's probably not an option. And actually my guess is that Runway only shows you the latest version of whatever someone else trained. This is another complicated topic, but there actually is a way to train your own models outside of Runway and bring them in. And when you bring them in, you have the option of different checkpoints. So like that's like advanced level. I actually have a video on that if anyone is interested in that, like how to actually bring in your own models into Runway, especially into a style game model. But yeah, in most cases, because these are trained on Runway, you're just gonna be stuck with whatever they did the training in. And if you wanna train it yourself, like there might be a case where the Simpsons model, actually I think the Simpsons model is open source, so you could download it and you could do your own training, but you're gonna do your own training from scratch.
Is there such thing as overtraining?
Yes, there is such a thing as overtraining. Yep. And we'll talk about that with when we do training in week 4.
So it seems like a lot of the models are trained on, you know, objects that are they're not abstract. So if you were to train something on, say, like 1,000 abstract images, like is it just going to be a big mush?
It depends on the type of abstraction. So it's kind of tricky. This is a thing that we talk about a lot, which is called diversity. If you have abstract images that are all like color fields, it'll probably learn color fields. I don't know that you want to generate style gang color fields. That feels like maybe like a bad use of StyleGAN, but it's possible. Or if you were to like find one artist, or like maybe if you were to find like, do all of Jackson Pollock's paintings, which are more like splatter paintings, it would learn splatters and would learn different types of splatters. But if you were to just take, say, like scrape like Google Images for abstract art, it would probably turn to mush because it's just such a diverse range of things. So it's a little challenging. The nice thing about Runway is Runway trains stuff really, really fast. It's expensive, but it trains stuff really fast. So it trains in, I think, Nye, maybe you said like 5 hours or something. Like the models I train on take days. And we'll talk about that in training, why that is. But essentially, like you can do something really quickly. If you're willing to spend a little bit of money, you can do stuff quickly in Runway and find out whether it worked or not. So even I might like do a quick Runway model just to see how if it works or not, and then I might train it myself using my own parameters.
You may have already answered this, but can you use like P5JS to drive the inference options, like the sampling distance and the truncation value, besides like just going between vectors?
So you can control truncation, because truncation is a part of the model. Sampling distance is actually just a part of that grid interface. So you can't control that because there's no need to. It's only for that UI. But other models do have, actually, let's just look at BigGAN real quick, because I do actually want to sort of see what's available in it. So let's just add to workspace, new workspace, sure. So in the case of BigGAN, you'll see here, like, there are a bunch of these categories, and these categories are, it looks like types of birds, types of other animals. This has been trained on a data set called ImageNet, which is mostly about recognizing animals or recognizing some objects. We'll see a bunch of categories here. So there is no sampling distance, or there's no other features here. So in this case, you could control this using P5. And I think they actually have the label. There's like a label type of thing you can do here. So there's a category and there's a Z. We'll talk about this when we get to P5. But there are ways to control certain things. We have to sort of know what you can and cannot control. Helen, do you have a question, or is it just... Okay, cool. So we will go over a lot more about StyleGAN in particular in the next couple weeks. But I want to make sure we have time so Leah can go over style transfer. StyleGAN and style transfer are two different things, which is very confusing, but they are two different things. So if you have more questions about StyleGAN, or if you want to like go ahead and start training your own models, go ahead and ask me in Slack, or like ask me after we're done. But I want to make sure we cover style transfer.
Cool. So I'm gonna go over a demo of style transfer. Yeah. So next slide. So yeah, style transfer is kind of a thing you've probably seen a lot of. This is an example with a content image of the lion with the style image of Starry Night applied to it. And then these are all different images with the same content image, but different style images applied on top. Next slide. Yeah, so style transfer started, the first paper was in 2015 by this German guy, Gattis, and these are images from the original paper. It's just like a photo with different styles applied to it. Next slide. Yeah, and so how does style transfer work? What it does is it accepts two things as inputs. There are two inputs. One is a content image, and one is your style image. And it takes those and produces an output image. Yeah, and as you can see, the output image is like the content image with the style of your supplied style image like applied on top of it. Next slide. Yeah, so that process of like where you give it two inputs of a content image and a style image, and you're like, hey, produce an output image, that at this point, when you're going through it in Runway, is called testing or evaluation, because the model has already been trained. But yeah, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail of like how it works under the hood when you're training a style transfer model. You have access to the video. Awesome. Okay, so what you're gonna see in this video is like how this output image kind of converges through different steps of training over like as it gets better and better during the training process. So what it does is like the model is first given a content and a style image. And then at first, when it's like just like a baby model before you've trained it at all, it just kind of spits out noise. Then as it trains more and more in more iterations, it's like, okay, what did I produce? How similar in structure is this to my content image? And how similar in texture is this to my style image? And that, like how it figures out how similar it is like, it's kind of like a little bit of complex linear algebra of multiplying the matrices of like this image times the output image, but I won't go into that detail now. Yeah.
If you are interested in exactly how this works, I have a video on it that I can post in Slack as well. But I think what Leah said is like pretty much all you need to know for this class.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, in Runway, there are a lot of different style transfer models because the first model came out in like 2015, and since then there have been a lot of variations and a lot of improvements over it. So if you just actually, I'll share my screen right now. There, can you stop? Okay, there we go. Yeah, so if we go into okay, you guys see Runway? Okay. So we're here in Browse Models, and so if we just type style transfer, you can see that there are a bunch of models here. Most of them, I think pretty much all of these are style transfer, except for maybe this one is disabled. Say correction again. But yeah, let's take a look at this one. I'm just picking this one in particular for the demo just because I've tested it and I know that it's pretty fast on the fly. So here we are inputting our content image, and here we're inputting our style image, and then down here's where it should export. So for input, let's just do some camera input out of my webcam. And for a style image, I will pull up the file I had.
So what happens if you put a directory, like a bunch of images?
As the content or as a style?
Like, because you had a choice between choosing a single file or choosing a directory. So in this situation, what would happen if you had pointed to a directory?
For the style image?
Yes.
I don't think I had a choice to choose a directory. I know for some style transfers you can do multiple style images, but I think this particular one, that's not an option.
So you can choose a directory for your content input. Actually, someone literally just asked this today in the Runway Slack, and I'll post a link to it. There's a really good discussion about like how it works and what's going on there, which I'll post too. But yes, you can choose, if you choose a file directory for your content image, it's basically just gonna apply all of those styles to that image, or like, yeah, it's gonna apply all of your, it's gonna apply your style to all of the content images in sequence. And then I think you would choose the export output of a directory, and it would spit out all those images.
I see. Good. We can see what happens. This might take a little while because I'm running it on this directory of 7 images. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the Empire State Building, I believe, with the Kandinsky style applied to it. But I did input this directory.
The Chrysler Building, sorry.
Oh, the Chrysler Building. Yeah, my bad.
Okay.
Yeah, so it looks like Yeah. Derek, do you know how I would export the entire directory?
Yeah, so click on export type
Mm-hmm.
and then select image directory.
Yep.
And then just give that a name, just so I don't know where it's going to save to, but just so you can find it later.
Okay, and then it should export all 7 of those.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, cool.
Now, the thing that I never remember is you might actually have to click into each image in the directory. Or no, it looks like it's automating it. Okay. The thing that's a little funky is it doesn't always show up in your preview. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, cool. Learn something new. Do you guys have any questions for me or Derek about style transfer?
Yeah, so I tried it with by feeding it some of my exports from my Magic the Gathering stuff, and was pretty disappointed with the results.
What about
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So I have some theories about why sometimes this doesn't work as well as I would like. There is some stuff going on behind the scenes that you don't know about and Runway doesn't tell you about, which is like it's trying to match sizes of these images together. So in the case of this this building, it's 768 by 1024. I don't know what size the Kandinsky image is, but my guess is that it might be small. In which case what it's doing is actually rezzing up that image to match, and that's why you don't see a lot of the details. So what you might want to play with, and I would recommend this for everyone, if you want to try stuff with style transfer, is try playing with higher res images, or try playing with too low res content and style images. The thing is, behind the scenes, you actually like, in the libraries that I use, I actually tweak the style size a lot to be able to get the right details. And what you'll see here is like the details are not as good as you would like. And I think that's just because you have to play with the scale of this. And unfortunately, Runway doesn't really like make that accessible. And I think that's one of the bigger issues with a lot of these models is that to actually get them to work, sometimes you have to tweak stuff behind the scenes and you don't always know what those tweaks need to be until you play with it a lot. So my guess is that that's what's going on here. My guess is that it also might be what was going on with other models. In general, I would say like try uploading just really high res versions of both and see what happens. It's going to downsample it on its own end, or like you can use these image options on the left here to sort of change the type of sizing you have available to you. But yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like there's a little bit of a black box, especially with style transfer around how it works or doesn't work. Leah, you might need to hit run to just get it to run. It looks like you're stopped. Yeah. So style transfer is definitely one of the finicky versions of models. And I'll generally say I am quite often frustrated by using them inside of Runway, which is disappointing because they should be really fun to use within Runway. But I think some of these things behind the scenes aren't working as well as I would like them to.
So there's like no like post-production we can do beside maybe like downsizing our source image or, yeah.
Yeah, so there you'll see like the textures are already getting a little better, but it's still not perfect. I've never used Ada in style transfer, so I don't know, maybe there's a certain way that it's meant to work. The other post-production you can do is you could actually like open your style image in Photoshop and almost tile it, and you're likely to get better textures out of that. I've done that like sort of in demos I've done before. So yeah, it takes a lot of playing around to get good style transfer images out of Runway, especially. If you are interested, like I also have a collab version of a notebook, and I've done like a live stream demo of how to do it in another place. So you really want to do style transfer, you might get better results outside of Runway.
Does this only work for images, or could other data sets also work? I mean, are GANs just mathematical models that fight against each other that we could put different things into? Or is it just this, I mean, certainly for Runway, but like just sort of in general, I'm thinking about different data sets.
So with most models, there's a specific input and a specific output. So in the case of style transfer, it's a specific single image in and most often a single image style. So you basically have a pair of images you put into it, and then you get an output from it. So in this case, you could put in video, like you could separate out all the frames of a video, into individual frames, and you could load in a folder like this. Now, the thing is, you won't get a really seamless video out for various reasons, but you could do it and you'll get like a very sort of noisy video that comes out of it. I don't know if there's other, is that what you mean by other data sets, or what other things are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, ultimately, like what I'm thinking about is like motion data, right? And that's X and Y data, right? And then like if there was sort of this motion and then there was a different motion and then we're feeding it together. I'm just kind of thinking about the architecture of these GANs, because these have been built for images with like sort of X and Y, and then they're kind of compared, and I think they're compared this and this. I'm just sort of curious how the architecture works in terms of feeding other sorts of data if you were just feeding in like X and Y values and things like that.
So in those cases, you would definitely need to find a different model. I don't know if any models like that exist. I'm sure someone out there is playing with them. But in general, most models have a very specific input type and a very specific output type. And I've seen like, there's some hacky ways around stuff. Like I've seen people do audio. Like so if you're familiar with like something like a spectrograph, which is basically a visual representation of audio. I've seen people make spectrographs of certain sounds and then do style transfer on those sounds and then reverse the program of getting spectrogram data back out into, back to audio. So like you can do some really weird audio stuff by just doing that. Now there may be cases of where you could hack together like X and Y coordinates, so you could like do a style transfer on a black and white X and Y like sort of drawing, but then you need to find a way to reverse engineer it out of there. So in most cases, the models you'd have to find are ones specific to that. So I don't know if anyone asked me in this class, or it was in my style GAN class, but someone had asked about 3D models and whether you can take a 3D like point cloud as an input. And I don't think there are any models in Runway that do that, but there are models in other places that do take 3D cloud point inputs and can generate, like do machine learning on those things. But you usually have to have a specific input and a specific output in mind beforehand, before just throwing stuff at things.
Stop sharing.
Cool, so we are at time. I'm interested, do people want to talk in small groups about projects or ideas they have? Do they want to throw them to me and I can sort of give you feedback on them? Again, I can stick around for a while if you have questions or want to explore new things. But I also want to be careful of, or be aware of people's time, because I know some people have families you need to get back to or whatnot, so.
I wouldn't mind bringing up into smaller groups.
Okay.
Yeah,
would you mind? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd be interested to talk more about the possibilities of video or motion with some kind of style transfer thing. And I know like a few of us in Slack have talked about that. I did like a really quick attempt the other day at something like using the vector model that I had with like the botanical faces and just applied it to some like random public domain video. And I was like, well, what's going to happen? And the results were like really disappointing. And I was like, why doesn't this look like the weird botanical heads? So yeah, so I'd be curious if anyone else wants to stick around and talk more about what's possible. I'd be into that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about some more video stuff. Do people just want to like sort of throw ideas at me or just talk? Like, I shouldn't be the only one talking. Like Leah can certainly talk about things, and you guys can give ideas to each other if that makes sense, and we can just talk as a group if that works for folks.
I'd be kind of interested in, and maybe this can be like an ongoing discussion or part of a Slack group or something, or like just spitballing ideas for how we get our data sets and exploring for that, because I have ideas, but no idea how to go about finding a large enough data set to make it work.
Totally. Leah, would you mind starting a thread in Slack where we can just sort of like all talk about our data set ideas?
Yeah, I think there was a thread about a week ago. That's like
cool. If you don't mind just linking to it again, so we can find it.
Totally.
Slack is so hard. If it's like a week ago is like eons, it's impossible to find it. I also know that some folks in here are familiar with using Python or doing other sort of scraping. And I'm also happy to help people like sort of scrape stuff. The key is always like, where do I find this many images? And that can be a bit of a challenge, but I can post some links. I'll also talk about that more next week about like where you might find open source data sets or just like techniques. Like we'll look at Instagram. Instagram happens to be like a really easy way to scrape data sets, and then it's about finding the right account or finding an account that has a lot of images, that sort of thing. But we can definitely figure out ways to get data sets for people, or like try our hardest is basically the best we can always offer.
Yeah, and next class will also be like touching on data sets in the second half of class. So yeah, stay tuned.
Eric, are you aware of anybody generating spectrograms like using the Big GAN model, like training them?
Interesting. I haven't seen anyone train their own spectrograms. I've mostly seen them manipulate stuff, either like taking a spectrogram and putting it into Big GAN or doing style transfer on it or other things. I don't know enough about spectrograms to know if you would need like, I don't know how a spectrogram converts, like how much of sound is converted to an image. Obviously you can get lots of songs, so like clearly you could do it, but I don't know enough about how the space would work to really be able to explore it, but I'm sure we could look at it and sort of find out.
So if we find a data set, should we do the job of massaging all of them to be like the same like dimension? Or yes, the same dimension, but like I guess like 500 by 500 versus like 1,000 by 1,000.
Yeah, so there's two ways to think about this. So one, Runway does a lot of that stuff inside of it. It just depends on how much control you want. So you might find a bunch of images that are like some are square and some are rectangular, and like I think like Runway will just auto crop and resize to whatever size it needs. That doesn't always lead to the best and cleanest data set. So just sort of up to you if you are like, I'm cool with just like trying and seeing what happens. If you know Python, I have a whole library around like normalizing and cropping and other things, images that I can share. I also have a ton of videos. Actually, I think, you know what? I didn't even show the homework. So I should show the homework before people leave. Let me do that really quickly. But basically like that is one of the pieces of homework is like you can watch some videos around data sets and start to think about what you're going to make. So let me actually let me share my screen again and show the homework before I forget. Hi, Bug. Okay, so your homework is for next week, let's start thinking about data sets. So I have a whole collection of data set videos. Most of them are around, so some of them are thinking about how you actually make a data set. Others are on particular techniques like scraping Instagram or scraping Flickr. But I definitely recommend like going in there and just like playing, like watching some of the videos. Now they're usually about, you can watch them at 1.5x and they're probably all like about 20 minutes or less. So you should be able to like watch them relatively quickly. If there's a particular thing you're interested in, let me know and I can like just point you at the right one. So I would say like there's a couple ways you can do this. You can start thinking about like what personal things do I need to scan or photograph that I might have, or can I find some websites that have images or videos or things that I want for that sort of stuff. We will be doing a demo of how to scrape Instagram next week because it's the easiest thing to use and it's like all you have to do is find an account and we can like run it. You do have to install some software on your computer, which might be hard for some, might not be, but I'm happy to help people through that. So yes, so the first homework assignment is just start thinking about data set, think about what sort of how you want to make it. And then your next assignment is just to keep exploring models. So, we've only shown a handful of models in this class. I know people have explored some other ones, but there's probably way more inside of Runway. So keep just playing around and finding what's in there. So that is it for homework. There are links that we will link to in our class notes for the Instagram video as well as for other data set videos. So I will make sure I provide that. And I would also say like, please don't be afraid to ask me questions in Slack. I'm happy to like respond and link you to videos if I have them produced. And if I don't have a video produced, I'm happy to make a video to share with folks because it's easier if I share a video with everyone rather than having to like do one-on-ones with folks just because of scale. So. Does that answer your question, Claudia? Or at least start to answer your question?
Yes.
Cool.
I have. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think April, can we just let's have April? I think she's been trying a little bit. Yeah.
Thanks. It might be sort of outside of the scope of this class, but I was wondering about training text sets in Runway.
Yeah. So I think Gene Kogan just did a Runway set on GPT-2. So I can link you to that. Basically, Runway also has a YouTube channel, and they like produce videos on that. I am not a text person, so like NLP or anything like that. I can certainly point you towards some examples, but like I'm definitely not that well versed in it. But yeah, I think you're welcome to try things if you're interested in it.
Okay, cool.
There are also, I should say, there are also models. So there's a model like what we showed in the first week of class, which is attention GAN, which is producing images from text. Obviously, it's not great, but it does work. And there's also ones that produce, which I think maybe you explored already, which is like creating captions from images.
Mm-hmm.
So there's other ways to explore language in those sort of ways.
Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Nai, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask about like, is it even worth thinking about segmentation in terms of images? And is that just like crazy that you have to go and you paint 1,000 images, or is there like ways to create segments? You know,
there's a model in Runway. Let me go back to sharing my screen. So when I showed what Janelle Shane was working on, so she used a model called Deep Lab. Let me pull up Runway here. So let's just go over here, browse models, and let's type in Deep Lab. And this is semantic image segmentation and labeling. Now, there's two things to know about this. Is the things it looks for are specific to MobileNet. Now, I could probably Google it and find exactly what it looks for in those things. But depending on what images you feed it, it might not find those things, and it's gonna like force segmentation onto you. So I would definitely say drawing 1,000 segments is probably gonna be too much, definitely for this class.
Yeah.
But there might be interesting ways to actually like generate your own segments from something like this. So like, I'm just gonna upload, of course. Let me upload something. Let me try to find a smaller image here that has this.
But are there also models, like if we do get segmentation and training, that like it could be used in like a Photoshop or something, or?
Yeah, so the Photoshop plugin that works with this does take, it basically works on Spade Cocoa, which is you feed it colored segments, sort of what that iPad app was, except it works for Photoshop. So you feed it that, and then it spits back images produced. There's basically a color mapping that allows you to map different colors to different things. Let's try this. This is still a really big image. Let's just try this one. Sure, why not? Wow, that's a huge image. So essentially, like this model works by, it takes an image as an input and it tries to guess what the segment should be. So what Janelle Shane did is she fed that Star Wars video into the map, got the mapping out of it, and then plugged that mapping into Spade Cocoa, which then generated images based on those color labels. Now, the thing that's weird is I don't know if those color labels are actually the same. Like, I don't know if blue represents humans, both from this model and the other model, which might have just been the fun that she was having with it. That's where it would get tricky, is you have to make sure that the color labels match up or whatever.
Got it. Cool.
I'm gonna let this run for a little bit just to see if it does produce an image. I also need to crank it down way smaller. But yeah, I would say drawing your own segments is pretty gnarly. Like, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, so you'll see it produced a very like kind of crappy segment map. There is a masking option as well. So it basically said like this pink thing is probably a human. Oh, right. So it says when you hover over it, it says person. Bottle, interesting. It thinks part of the leg is a bottle because there's a hand, right? So they're funny, they're interesting. It also looks like it's cropping the image. I don't know. Anyway, this exists. It's clearly not perfect, but it is an option if you want to try it.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
I saw a project where someone was using like numerical data to it seemed like perhaps just move around in the latent space of like a style GAN or something. Is that just like taking some kind of, so in the example, it was like opening and closing a tulip based on the price of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah.
So that Anna Riddler project.
Yeah. Yeah, she's probably, I haven't really looked at that project. I mean, she might be doing more than just mapping those values to -1 or 1. But that's one way you could do it, is just take that value, map it to a certain, do some calculation to map it to a 512 dimensional vector, and then do that. Yeah. Yeah.
So you'd just be like traversing that space basically based on that
Yeah.
mapping.
And based on what I've seen of that project, and I'll link to that project because it's pretty cool. It's probably that, right? Because the flowers don't change that much, if I recall. But like they change a little bit, but it's mostly like, it's nothing crazy.
Yeah, I think they like open wider. The petals open when the price is higher, and they close when it's lower.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
but all
okay. Well,
but all the images are being drawn like, you know, from like a style GAN.
Yeah, I can guess how she did it. Definitely couldn't do it in Runway for the open close, but you could just traverse a space using that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I had a question about CycleGAN. Is that's not style transfer, that's generative adversarial network, but is it similar to StyleGAN or like what? Much older?
Yeah. Let me share my screen again, and we can show CycleGAN for folks who aren't familiar with it. So CycleGAN is a form of a GAN, but the output is not too dissimilar from style transfer. The difference is just like how the architecture works. So this is something you have to train yourself, or like what they have trained this on is a couple different options here. So there is horse to zebra, which is like the most famous one. There is a style, so there are style transfer types of models or checkpoints here. They just work differently. So the way style transfer works is it actually uses a pre-trained network, and it pulls the layers out of pre-trained networks. I have a video on this if you're really interested, but it's like way more beyond than this class. But essentially, CycleGAN works in a different way. CycleGAN works from image to image translation. So it learns how to translate a image to a new image. So it's just been trained differently. Whereas style transfer actually just like is like, it almost isn't trained. It's like, or like most of the earliest version of style transfer is not trained. It is really just like pulling from a pre-trained network to generate those layers, and then it like does a bunch of math. So it's a little different, but it's like, it kind of gives the same result. And that's sort of what's interesting about all these is like, there are different ways to get different results using different architectures. And their differences are going to be pretty subtle in terms of how they work. So let's just actually grab this one and let's just run it and see what happens. So this is actually, I didn't realize like how many checkpoints were available in this CycleGAN model. This one would actually be like fun to play with. Or you could even try like, how does CycleGAN's Van Gogh differentiate from like uploading Van Gogh as a style option in a style transfer? You know, again, like projects could also be like totally investigative. Like, how do these things differ? It doesn't have to be like, I have to make a piece of art, and like, I think fully documenting something that's cool is also interesting. There we go. So I would actually say like, this might be better than the style transfer you get out of the other models. Now what's tricky here is similarly, these checkpoints, I have to turn the machine off and I have to turn it back on to switch. So like, unlike style transfer, you just upload an image and it's ready to go. This you have to do a little bit more with to get it to set. So if I stop this, and then let's pick Cézanne and hit run remotely. It's going to take another minute to spin up for all this. So it's a little slow, but I think it's worth exploring. Like, is this a better option? Now, again, the problem here is you can't train your own CycleGAN model, so you're stuck with what they've already given you as checkpoints. You could, if you want to get crazy, you could actually train your own model. I have a video on how to do that, and you could upload it to Runway yourself and use it yourself. But it's outside the scope of this course, I would say.
So if you were just training your own CycleGAN, like how many do you still want? Are you still aiming for like 500 images, or can you get away with less?
You can get away with a little bit less with CycleGAN, not too many less though. What you actually need for CycleGAN, you actually need 2 folders of different data sets. So you actually still need 500. It's just like you can have 250 of horses and 250 of zebras, but they have to be, you still need a lot of data to make it work.
Good night, people. Thank
All
you.
right, thanks. Bye.
See you next week.
See you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. See you. This is really slow. What are the questions? Claudia, it sounds like you have an idea for a project. Do you want to talk about it and we can think about how we might go about solving it?
No, I have like a bunch of ideas, but it's just like I'm thinking, like, I mean, like ideally, like I would be able to. So I have a lot of artist friends, right? And it's either very similar to the Magic the Gathering thing, where it's like, okay, can I actually like capture your style and at least get you like a jumping point? It's like how, yeah. And then another one is I have a friend who's also a fantasy artist who started doing line art for his all of his drawings essentially for people to color. And it's like, oh, okay, that's actually like, since I know how I tried the de-oldifying thing and learned how that was trained, I was like, oh, in theory, that should work. If it's like, here's the original art and here's the line art that he drew on top of it. If you have enough iterations of that, you can theoretically train a thing where I can input like some line drawings and then it exports some crazy thing. And so that's why I'm trying to like basically like understand or build a mental model to understand like what is possible and what is possible in Runway.
Yeah, so that's a pix-to-pix model, which I also have videos for. I don't know if there's even a pix-to-pix model inside of here. Let me see real quick.
There is a pix, or it's a pix-to-sketch.
There's a pix-to-pix, yeah. There's a pix-to-pix model here, which the reason I ask if there's a pix-to-pix model is that the way to import your own version of a model is to fork their GitHub repo and then bring in your own GitHub. It's like kind of convoluted, but it is possible. So if you'd want to do something like pix-to-pix, that would be a possibility. You'd have to train it outside of it, but it seems like you're pretty game to try that stuff. So it's certainly something we could try and mess with, yeah. So I guess what I would also say is like, I do have like a number of videos around how to do training outside of Runway. You should probably be like somewhat aware of how the command line works or how code works, because it does take a little bit more effort to get those running, but I have videos for them. And if you're interested, I'm happy to like show you how to do it or how to set it up. So it's up to whatever your, how much time you have and then how willing you are to like sort of get your hands dirty with things.
Oh, so I guess like, yeah, I did go down the rabbit hole of some of the videos with pix-to-pix, like now that I actually see that shared screen, but it wasn't super clear to me on like how I was supposed to even interact with that.
Yeah, let's look at, so I'll show pix-to-pix very quickly because pix-to-pix is super hard because you don't know what these two things mean. So first off, don't use facade labels because you just won't. Facade labels basically takes a segment map and converts it to the facade of a building. I guarantee you do not have any label maps that are going to work with that. Let's look at day to night. So if I quickly find an image that is, let's just do a Google search for daytime image. So let me just grab this thing. These are going to be huge images. Well, let's just do it. I'll do it really, really quickly and I'll dump it into Photoshop. Let's just download this guy.
You can also screenshot it, right?
Perfect. There you go. Yes, there you go. Although my high-res screen is still going to be big, but let's deal with that. Okay, so screenshot. Let's just open this in. Come on, buddy. So let's just make this 800 wide. In general, Runway will be happier if you upload small images. So I definitely recommend when playing around, start with a small image, and then you can try a bigger one and see how long it takes. Because some of these models will take like days if you try to give it too big of an image. That will not work. Let's cancel and switch this to PNG. JPEG or PNG also generally works fine. So now that I have that image and I go back to Runway, so again, the way this works is this is day to night. Usually the name will tell you what it's supposed to do. So this is going to convert a daytime image to a nighttime image. And let's just upload this. Are you serious? Okay, fine. And if you like that, what's going on here? File. There we go. And when I run this, it's going to hopefully convert that image to a nighttime image. Now, this is getting in the weeds, but pix-to-pix, the difference between pix-to-pix and the difference between cyclogan is pix-to-pix are trained with the exact same images, like imagine them like an onion skin where they're overlaid over top of each other. So in this case, like the case where you're talking about where an illustrator is drawing lines and someone else fills them in, that would be a pix-to-pix model. Cyclogan is a model where they're what's called unpaired images. So clearly you can't have a horse perfectly overlaid with a zebra. So there's a way that it learns how to translate between those two. So this one you'll see, like, I wouldn't say this nighttime image is that good, but it is kind of interesting that it gets the colors of a nighttime image, right? It's kind of smoky. It's almost like it's been a smoky city nighttime image. And it clearly lost the clouds. It doesn't know how to do nighttime clouds. It only kind of maybe knows how to do trees. So again, like you could also mess with this and feed it images that are not daytime photos or just like other images, and who knows what it's going to do. It might do nothing, or it might do something weird. So yeah, pix-to-pix works, but again, one of the overarching issues with Runway is that you can't train your own models unless it allows you to. So right now, the only two models you can train in Runway are StyleGAN and GPT-2, which is a text model. So you're sort of stuck with like just whatever you have here. You could train it outside of it. That's definitely advanced and outside this class, but I'm happy to help people if they're really interested in it. And then you can bring it in Runway. Thing is, once you've trained your own model, if you understand that technique, you might as well just also do your own work outside of Runway because it's going to be cheaper.
Okay.
Right.
I have a question about, I guess it's sort of tangential to sort of ethics. Like, I'm ripping things from the internet to play with and then putting it out there, but I don't own it, right? Does this, like, if I show this work outside, is the community like pissed if I'm stealing things from different places and smushing them together to create data sets? You know?
So I think that the general rule of thumb is as long as you're not making money off of it. Like, I mean, you might get like a finger wagging, but I think you'll get like maybe like a takedown notice or a DMCA, or I think that's what they're called. Or yeah, there's a takedown notice and then there's a cease and desist, and the cease and desist is the worst situation. Usually they'll just give you like
It's probably going to become more and more of an issue, right? As people are stealing more and more stuff to get, because you need so much in order to make something, right? So it's like really hard for us to generate anything that's like original.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of take on this is obviously if you're playing around and you're not making money off it, I think it's worth exploring. Obviously that changes when you start to sell things or whatever. You know, from a legal perspective, it's complicated because it just depends on whether you're okay with being sued and hiring a lawyer or whatever to protect yourself. Everything that I've seen basically says that like if you're making new pieces of work, I forget what exactly they call it. It's like a transformative license. You generally have a little bit more leeway if you're making really transformative works. But what's transformative is still an open question, especially within the world of AI and machine learning. So be nice. Like I would say, like in general, like if you're going to take all of someone's work and share it afterward, you might want to ask them if it's cool to like play with it. Like a lot of people are actually interested in like, I would love to see what machine learning does to my artwork. Sure, try it. And then if they don't like it, they might be like, please don't show that to anyone, or like, don't put my name on it. But in general, I think it's probably good to ask. But I think it's also like if stuff turns out completely weird and not even remotely like that Simpsons model, like yes, it looks like The Simpsons, but it does not look like The Simpsons characters. I don't think anyone would say that they're that you're infringing on someone's trademark by using that.
But really, since like the truth is, since 2009, the way that copyright rules have been enforced is like dramatically changed. And I mean, I think it's like a personal thing. You're protected by law. Whether or not someone is going to give you a letter is like a different story.
Yeah, I would say in general you're protected by law, but it's an ethical question of how do you feel about it. Or like if someone writes you an email and says like, you're stealing my life's work, how are you going to feel about it?
Also, some companies they just have like a team of lawyers that all they do is like send out like finger wagging emails to like scare you off, but most of the time, yeah. So
yeah.
I wanted to throw an idea out there just in terms of workflows, because the idea is ingrained in my mind, but maybe there's a model or a suggestion outside. But basically is like making a painting out of that day's stock market and like what that feeling or mood is. And I don't know, I guess I'm just thinking about the Spade landscape Coco one or other models, like, because it could maybe even the Pix to Pix one with the labeled data, because the stock market data could be painted to look like those colors, if that's a possibility. But something where, let's say right now we're in a bear market where like the painting is able to capture or translate that sentiment, or whatever, we go back into a bull market or even go into specific stocks and just kind of paint that mood.
Yeah, so I want to make sure she didn't mute me because she's definitely stepping all over my computer right now. Yeah, I mean, again, part of it is what can you produce with an input, right? So like, say you just generated some scenes using like maybe SVGs or something, and then you color code them based on stock market prices. You could do something like that, and then it would generate like a slightly different scene, or like you could, you know, sort of, if you can do that mapping, then yeah, you could certainly do that. That's most of what like generative art is just finding interesting ways to map new things or map ideas to generative art. So yeah, that's certainly a possibility as well. Yeah, it just becomes what do you imagine the input to be, right? So it could be a Spade Coco layout or a landscape, or like I don't even know, Spade Coco might have like animals, so you could even like actually generate a bull or a bear depending on like whether it's up or down, right? So that might be kind of interesting. You could like, what you could do is you could grab an SVG of the animal shape and then color it or whatever, like according to what it is or whatever. Like there's probably lots of ways you could think about that, and that'd be really interesting to explore. Most of your time is being spent on generating the input, which is fine. Like that's totally fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you could like map like food chain, like the lion at the top with like the bugs on the bottom, and like map all of this like animal imagery to the different like values of you know, success and failure and vulnerability. I don't know. Now you're giving me weird ideas.
Actually, so I'll share my screen really quickly. Like I should do like longer demos of a lot of these, but I'll share my screen really quickly and we can look at what Spade Coco does. So let me share my screen and share. Also, Leah, if you have to take off, you shouldn't feel like you have to stick around. So let's just do input segmentation. Okay, so I don't even need to run this to see what my label possibilities are, but I might need a bigger screen. Okay, so Spade Coco essentially takes a lot of color data. So each color represents a different shape. So actually, this is actually a fun demo. So let's just do it. So this is mostly around this is mostly set around objects. So there isn't an animal one. I bet you there's an animal one somewhere else. Or maybe there are animals further along we get here. There's a teddy bear. So like basically you select this color here. They also have a drawing interface, so you can do some drawing directly in here. It's up to you whether you want to draw them directly here or you want to input them from P5. But okay, so I've selected the teddy bear. So now I want to draw a teddy bear. So like I think I am like the world's worst artist. So I think you want some ears, you want a head, and then while it's running, you might want a body. I don't know if this is gonna work until I stop painting, but let's see. Oh, maybe my model is still just getting set up here. But there are ways to paint with this. So let's let this run for a little bit. But you'll see over here, there's a ton of labels. And you can also do this thing over here that's called export colors. When you hit this, it's gonna give you a CSV. And if you open this CSV in, I don't know, what am I gonna open it in? Numbers? Let's open it in numbers. It will tell you what the color code is for each of these. So again, this is what Fabian did in that demo that I showed, which is like, he basically made a P5JS drawing tool that would map these colors to the names. So he could draw an airplane that would map to this color. And then you pass this color, you basically create an image and you pass that image into Runway. So here you go, this is my teddy bear, which does not look like a great teddy bear, but again, sometimes it's hard to tell like what is supposed to work and what isn't. So like the bicycle usually works pretty well. So you draw two wheels, and then you draw, this is backwards, or I guess it's not backwards, it's just like backwards from how I meant to draw it. And then you get a little seat, and then you get your handlebars.
This was built by a whole bunch of people making segmentation maps.
Yeah, so basically this is from the folks at NVIDIA. So they probably took a bunch of games or like other engines, and they probably made their poor data science intern draw a bunch of maps for things. Like quite literally, they probably made someone do it manually. Once you have it manually, actually, you can do the reverse, right? So that deep lab thing that is supposed to be able to convert stuff to segments, you can do the reverse with it fairly well.
So this reminds me of another idea, which is, so I do play in Cinema 4D a little bit, and some you can, like, depending on, like, it's like you have this realistic render, but you could also like remove all the textures and just have an outline to get that. And so you can have that generate your segmentation potentially.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, I mean, you'd want to map the colors to whatever that CSV is, but yeah, it could definitely work. Yeah. So this is basically why I would say, like, keep looking at other models. And if you find a model and you're like, this thing looks cool, but I don't know how it works, just let me know. And Leah and I can obviously respond and let you know, like, how it might work. I think I've said this before, but like a really good recommendation I have is when you look up a model, if you hover over it and you click the Learn More button, and you scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see there's usually like a GitHub repo or like something else. And if you go to that GitHub repo, you can usually see how it's meant to work, right? So here is Spade. So you'll see like this is clearly meant better for like environmental scenes than it is for like drawing actual objects, but like this looks pretty nice, right? You can generate some rocks, generate some water, generate some skyline, and then you can generate images from that. So usually if you go to any of these models, you'll find that there's images sort of in their description, and that might help you figure out how they're supposed to work. All right. So let's see who added stuff to the chat. Cool, just some people heading out. All right, cool. Yeah, so it seems like we should probably wrap up now. But again, just please post whatever you want to in the Slack channel. And if I can help in any place, I will. And we'll definitely help out with data sets and stuff as well. So we'll probably do a thread or like Lee will link to the old thread for data sets. Then we'll also do a thread for potential projects, and people can just sort of post in there. And Lee and I can respond and give feedback on things. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see you next week.
Sure.